pour ces menaces. Non, la personne qui m'a menacé est responsable. Parce qu'on a dans notre société la responsabilité individuelle. Et chaque personne qui dit quelque chose ou qui fait quelque chose inacceptable est individuellement responsable. Mais ça ne veut pas dire que tous les camionneurs qui veulent simplement travailler, qui se battent pour le droit de travailler et d'avoir la liberté personnelle,
fucking god. John's
devraient
talking.
être
She's a fucking luxurious fucking life.
par les actions
Some of us just want to be
de
let
petits
the
groupes
fuck alone.
qui, dans plusieurs cas, n'ont rien à voir avec les
Fucking
camionneurs.
dying, chasing poverty.
I'll be supporting the truckers. I don't know exactly where, because I don't know exactly how this whole thing is going to be organized. I'm not in touch with any of the organizers, but I'm going to look for an opportunity to bring coffee and
cool.
support, friendship for peaceful,
Law-abiding,
law-abiding, hardworking, freedom-loving truckers who have kept my family and yours alive throughout this pandemic by putting food on our table. Thank you.
Yeah, and I just encourage the media not to forget about British Columbia.
What?
We still got a lot going on with the flooding.
Right.
We got to make sure we get the right infrastructure. For farmers. There is so much happening in my province, and we got to keep our focus on that. You guys have a great day. And I wish you luck in meeting today. Do you need to settle questions about Mr. O'Toole's leadership? Well, the meeting's still going on, and things are looking good, and we got a lot of work to do. We have barely had any parliament in 6 months. We got to get focused on the things that Canadians care about. Right? We got to talk about inflation, the cost of housing. Man, my assessment in my neighborhood in Abbotsford went up 46%. How does a young graduate afford a house today?
Fucking anybody.
How does someone that makes a 6-figure income afford a house today? The Canadian dream is being taken away by a lot of young people. And if Parliament's not focused on that, I think we're going to be debating C8 next week. That's what all Canadians want us to be talking about. How the government spending, a third of which outlined by the Parliamentary Budget Officer, has nothing to do with COVID. What's the impact on our long-term finances and the well-being of Canadians who are going to be left to pay that debt in the future? Those are the questions that need to be answered right now, and that's what the Conservative Party is focusing on.
And obviously, top of mind is the protest this weekend. Any thoughts on that, sir?
I will say one thing about the protest.
I love when you do this.
Canadians don't know where to turn right now. And I think the Ottawa media, the establishment media, has been looking for controversies with some of these truckers. They're trying to find all the bad things that someone might have said on social media. But you know what? There's a lot of people that are coming to Ottawa who don't know what else to do because their lives have been impacted just as much as mine and yours the last 2 years. And they're trying to find a constructive way to let people know, hey, I'm not okay with what's happening. I'm not okay with everything the government's doing. And you know what? If they want to drive across the country, I think that's actually a really healthy way to demonstrate what you feel about something, and that should be encouraged.
Absolutely, but are you concerned in any way about more extremist elements who are attempting to hijack that legitimate protest?
Well,
is that not cause for any concern?
You know what? That's something that is a part of any protest movement.
But we don't normally get death threats, sir.
Okay, well, fucking
I can tell you, I didn't normally get death threats until I became a member of Parliament.
Is that normal? Does that constitute normal today? Is that acceptable?
Well, you know what? That's a good question. What constitutes normal today? All I can say is that the large majority of people coming here are coming, trying to find a constructive way to let their voices be heard, and we need to focus on that. And I trust all of our public authorities here in Ottawa are going to take all the necessary precautions to make sure that it's peaceful. And I know the organizers want to have a peaceful protest too. Thank you, guys.
Are you satisfied with what you heard today?
We have been meeting.
Anything to settle the questions surrounding official leadership?
There's lots of discussion, and we have a good meeting. It's kind of to leave it a little
Yeah.
bit still going on, but
You really have to settle kind of the internal challenges that you face.
we got a good, strong caucus. We've been through challenges before. We're going to get through this one.
again and again. And then your solar is fucking well trained. They'll give me that. Fucking little sheets. Bah. Probably a shepherd. Yo, like, police prepared for protest near his capital? They're gonna be coming to Detroit. They even said they're not stopping in Ottawa. They're not going to Parliament because they're federal. Like, it's a fucking protest. Like, not like they're gonna go fucking storm fucking Congress. Like, what? Interesting. Eat your food? Finally. Thank you. What the fucking move through all that fucking drama? Why would you go to Obama? Hey? Hey. Well, fucking could be eating much worse, you know. Fucking dickhead. So you get fucking pork chops every night. Really? Okay, bye. Oh, right. The fucking Prime Minister's isolating because we fucking got COVID or some shit again. Whatever. Fucking Doug Trump's dead. No, I don't. That was fucking not nice to say. But still. Guy needs to fuck off. Dude. What?
Good evening. This is the news on RT America. I'm Farron Franzak, bringing you the headlines from the RT America studios right here in our nation's capital. Here's the headlines we're digging deeper for you on. First up, a race in the rescue of a U.S. F-35 plane that crash landed in the South China Sea. It's a bombshell of a story, and there's been zero coverage on cable news. Why the Chinese are rushing to grab it before the U.S. does. Plus, letters delivered to Russia yesterday from NATO and the U.S. over Russia's demands in Ukraine. What's President Vladimir Putin's reaction tonight? And finally, Prince Andrew dismisses his sexual assault claims and says, bring in a jury. Let's take it to trial. I speak with a lawyer to many of the prince's accusers, Gloria Allred. Well, let's get after it. So come with us and question more.
Oh no. Yeah, he's walking.
So we were the first to bring you the breaking news last night of a U.S. F-35 fighter jet crash landing in the South China Sea Monday. Now the clock is still ticking as the United States is trying to retrieve its most advanced fighter jet from the depths of the South China Sea. Well, it's a situation that analysts say will be monitored closely by Beijing in the coming days. For more information on this $100 million stealth fighter jet and the complicated process of recovering the aircraft, we now bring in RT correspondent Paxton Boyd. Pax, great to welcome you to Prime Time tonight. Let's first start off with, for those that aren't familiar with the F-35, what is the F-35?
Right. Well, according to Lockheed Martin, this is the world's first and only long-range stealth fighter jet. Now, it is the latest generation of these stealth aircrafts coming out of the United States, and as we mentioned, it is produced by Lockheed Martin. Now, the specifications on this bad boy, $100 million per plane. As you mentioned, it has the largest wingspan of any aircraft carrier, fighter jet that is. Now, it can carry 20,000 pounds of fuel, so this thing can travel extremely long distances, and it can reach supersonic speeds of Mach 1.6. Now, this aircraft can carry up to 18,000 pounds, both inside and out, about 5,000
Guess where they
inside,
get their
about
fucking
13,000
air
on the outside. And the key
from?
here is stealth there, and the fighter jet virtually undetectable and has unmatched ability to enter contested airspaces.
So, it begs the question, what countries have the F-35? Who uses it?
Obviously, the United States, as we mentioned, and NATO allies like Canada, Denmark, Italy, Belgium, Norway, the Netherlands, the United Kingdom, Poland, and you also have Israel in the Middle East. Now, in regards to Northern Europe, you have Finland, who also has them, who is also, of course, on the front lines of Russia. And So,
when you talk about Finland and then Russia, however, this is over in China. So why was this in the South China Sea, Tex?
Right. The big question here. Now, this aircraft is used explicitly for naval carrier operations, hence why it was in the South China Sea. But why there specifically? The U.S. has strategic allies in the South Pacific, like South Korea, Japan, even as far as Australia. So it is very important to maintain a presence there. China and North Korea, as we know, are adversaries to the United States and U.S. allies. And you even had North Korea fire off a test missile into the sea yesterday, Baron. So what's interesting about this specific aircraft carrier, the U.S.
fire? Oh, really?
Yeah, and that's a very, very expensive.
Fuck, man, you guys like setting shit on fire.
$100 million each time. So thanks so much for bringing us more updates on the F-35. We're going to keep monitoring it as well as you, Pax, and seeing kind of when they're going to pick up this plane or who picks it up. Pax and Boyd, thanks so much. The race is on. And joining us to discuss, we're joined by former Naval Intelligence Officer John Jordan.
What?
F-35 crash in the South China Sea. What do you make of it?
It's a very big deal. This is the fourth crash of an F-35 and the second at sea. The first at sea was in the Mediterranean.
Okay. Well, thank you for translating.
One crashed during a landing mishap, and when it at a very slow rate of speed, which is more likely than not, it's sitting whole on the bottom of the ocean. Now, this is a potential intelligence for any U.S. adversary that were to come across it, which is why the U.S. Navy is going to extraordinary lengths to retrieve it as quickly as possible.
John, one of the big things that you have on every plane is something that we call the black box, where you have the air controllers and the pilots talking. A lot of times you see in just even regular flights, in plane crashes, they can kind of figure out what went wrong. If China gets this black box, how bad is it? What's worse, if they get the engine, the black box, or both?
Okay, well, there isn't really a black box on fighters. I've been doing airplanes my whole life. That is a transport category thing that I have to construct accidents later on. Basically, every component of this airplane is enormous intelligence input. The avionics, which is really the electronics, the radars, how the airplane fights, basically, how it controls its weapons, its sensors, the materials used to construct it, the radar absorbent materials, the precise geometry of the design of the airframe itself is part of the stealth family of technologies. And then some of the internal components to it too, in terms of how energy is dissipated, so rather than reflected.
This message, an army message, army service, don't respond.
Equipment inside, because Link 16, how the F-35 integrates with other airplanes, whether it's an AWACS or other F-35s. So basically, everything from the rudder to the tutor is an enormous intelligence find for the particular.
Rudder to the tutor. I'm going to remember that one, John. You know, my other question, though, too, we had another guest on that said, this isn't a big deal. China's already got a lot of these blueprints anyway. Not a problem. You know a lot more about this than I'm assuming.
No, the Chinese would love to get their hands on this. Yeah, they've seen pictures of it. I'm sure they probably have, making an effort to retrieve some of the technologies through other means. But to be able to have a living example of the airplane that they can touch and feel and reverse engineer, and samples of not just the radar absorbent material on the surface, but a lot of the metallurgy inside, and to be able to pull apart some of the electronics, get direct access to the software. There's no substitute for actually having a real live airplane in your hands. But if you look back at the Cold War, for example, both sides, the U.S. and Russia, paid a premium on trying to get living examples of each other's tanks, airplanes, or some of the components for each, which is why the U.S. Navy is going to retrieve this, I think, in short order.
John, you know, that they could retrieve it in short order, yes, but there also is a possibility that the Chinese could pick it up. They have a stealth fighter of their own that they're working on and they're trying to perfect. If they get this fighter, is it game over? Are they on the same playing field then as the F-35?
If they get this airplane, and I don't think that they will, because the U.S. has enormous salvage resources. The China Sea is relatively shallow. The U.S. Navy knows exactly where it is. The Chinese would have to find it. They would have more of a needle in a haystack situations. In terms of retrieve, the Chinese are they're a real disadvantage. In terms of actually getting it, yeah, it would be an enormous boon. This is the most expensive weapon system the U.S. has ever purchased, and is a big part of our deterrence going forward in the conventional forces arena. If the Chinese were to get a copy of it, it would take them a while to reverse engineer and then incorporate some of these technologies into some of their, still on the drawing board. They're still quite a bit behind the U.S. on this, to incorporate those technologies into the airframes that they're developing. But yeah, it would be a huge deal if they did get a copy of it.
John, we appreciate your expertise on this. No matter if it's the U.S. or China that gets it, the one that does win, Lockheed Martin, because they got to make another one of these planes now. John Jordan, always great to see you, my friend. According to the Kremlin, Russian President Vladimir Putin has read that letter we told you about last night from the United States, which was a response to a security proposal submitted back in December by Moscow. Now, although the details of Washington's written response to Moscow is remaining confidential, a Russian official has said that there is not much cause for optimism. But fingers crossed, things may be changing. With a look, here's RT's Alex Mikhailovich.
There was hope that a letter delivered by America's top man in Moscow could lead to a positive dialogue between Russia and the United States in regard. Although details have not been disclosed, we now know the bulk of the U.S. response to a Russian security proposal all closed the door to further discussion.
They said in no uncertain terms about not accepting the main concerns relayed by the Russian Federation. Based on that, of course, there's little ground for optimism, but I would still refrain from any conceptual assessments.
Russia's made laid up on a number of occasions, with the U.S. and its NATO allies flat out rejecting the superpower's security priorities. Washington's letter reiterated that stance. Here's Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov's response.
There is no positive reaction on the main issue in this document. The main issue, let me remind you, is our clear position on the inadmissibility of further expansion of NATO to the east and the deployment of strike weapons that could threaten the territory of the Russian Federation.
Both seemingly reasonable requests. And while the U.S. does not seem to be wavering,
first of all, there's no change. There will be no change.
Today, NATO took a more diplomatic stance.
We stand by that core principle, which is linked to that open door policy that every nation has the right to choose its own path. We are concerned because we see that the military buildup continues, but for me, that's an argument against dialogue. For me, that's an argument in favor of engaging in dialogue to prevent a new armed conflict.
With the U.S. and friends continuing to insist that Russia is readying itself to invade Ukraine, dialogue seems like a reasonable choice. But although Russia wants to talk, it has been continuously sending out a clear message that everyone seems to be ignoring. Here's Russian Foreign Ministry spokesman Alexei Zaitsev.
From our side, we have repeatedly stated that our country doesn't plan to attack anyone. We consider even a thought about a war between our peoples unacceptable.
Even if war is off the table, there is no doubt that the U.S. and NATO, along with Russia, need to work together to sort out a number of issues where they do not see eye to eye, namely the situation in Ukraine. Although tensions are high, a diplomatic solution continues to be a strong possibility, an avenue which could improve relations between all the governments involved, as well as the lives of the people of Ukraine. For News on RT America, I'm Alex Mihailovich.
The situation in Ukraine also led to quite the entertaining moment today during the State Department briefing. So you had journalist Matt Lee, who focuses on diplomacy, countries getting along, asking Undersecretary of State Victoria Nuland what would happen to Nord Stream 2 if the Russians were to invade. Take a listen.
One way or another, Nord Stream 2 will not move forward. That's what you said, that's what he said, that's what... But Nord Stream 2 is already completed.
It has not.
It's finished. If they decided to turn it on right now, it would be sending gas or olive oil or vodka or whatever. It would be all they have to do is turn it on. So when you say it won't move forward, you mean it won't open for gas supplies?
Matt, it is not ready to be turned on. It has not been.
It's finished.
It has not been tested. It has not been certified. It has not been the regulatory pieces that would allow it to be turned on, both on the German side and on the EU side, have not been completed.
It's finished. From start point to end point, the pipeline is done. And whether or not there's certifications that need to be done or not, if you sent anything through it right now, you start Russian inventory.
As Senator Cruz likes to say, I don't quote him often, but as he likes to say, it is currently a hunk of metal at the bottom of the ocean. It needs to be tested, it needs to be certified, it needs to have regulatory approval, and no gas will flow through it till those things have cleared.
Joining me now to discuss everything coming out of Ukraine, we're going to bring in Peter Kuznick. He is a historian as well as a professor at American University. Professor, I'm going to start right off the top because we just had some breaking news handed to us. We have President Biden allegedly spoke with Ukrainian President Zelensky, where it basically went hypothetically. Zelensky telling Biden, hey, we don't need a war, we're good. President Biden responded, no, our intelligence sources tell me that we have you guys right here in the middle of February, like it's a dental appointment. Yeah. Now, intelligence out of Ukraine is saying that Zelensky is not a happy camper about this. Then immediately after, Professor, you have the U.S. media coming out saying the White House denies Biden told Ukraine Zelensky to brace for Russian invasion, even though Zelensky is now supposedly not happy. Your thoughts, Professor?
Well, Zelensky has not been very happy with Biden for a while. He's less happy with Scholz and Germany than he is with the United States, since the U.S. is at least providing more and more arms to Ukraine. But this latest exchange and the reactions was quite interesting. According to Zelensky's spokespeople, Biden said that the attack is imminent and that Kiev could be sacked, to expect that. And the United States is saying that it didn't say anything quite so alarmist and that they're not so certain that the attack is imminent. And so we've got, again, more space between the Ukrainian position and the American position. Just like we have space between the German position and the American position. And that's all creating a lot of uncertainty.
And you also have many in the American media saying, Russia, if war were to happen, they're going to shut off the Nord Stream 2 and put an energy crisis to the rest of Europe. But when you look at history, as you are a professor of history, has Russia ever done that in the past?
Has Russia? Exactly.
Cut off energy supply. They're talking about Nord Stream 2 cutting it off when apparently they're saying the last.
I don't think that the concern is that Russia's going to cut it off. The concern is that the United States is going to try to get Germany to cut it off. So Germany will cut off its nose to spite its face, is the argument that the United States has been pushing. But the Germans have been resistant. The Germans have never said that they're willing to do that. So we know that Europe gets 41% of its natural gas from Russia, 25% of its oil from Russia. The last thing that most of Europe wants to see is the Nord Stream 2 cut off and the energy supplies cut off. That would be a disaster. So the United States has been trying to find alternative sources, but there's not much out there. And so I don't think that's probably a non-starter also. That's part of the problem, that there's been disagreements within NATO, and especially with Germany, which is the most important country in Europe, really, economically. And Germany's been resisting even allowing the shipments from Britain to Ukraine to go through German airspace. So, I mean, the danger is there's been a buildup on both sides. More Russian troops going toward the border there, more war games, more aid being sent by the NATO countries to Ukraine. So we're going the wrong direction. Both sides are ramping up the danger of war rather than reducing the danger of war.
Professor, again, you're a professor of history. History often repeats itself. 30 seconds. Do you think there will be a war?
I can't think that there will, because that's insanity. There's a lot of possibility that it could happen. There are so many conditions now in place that could make a war possible. I hope sane people on both sides, on all sides, will prevail in this crisis.
Professor Peter Kuznick, thank you so much. We always appreciate your expertise. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Still had Prince Andrew denying the sexual assault allegations against him yet again, but this time adding one big caveat. We'll explain. In the meantime, make sure you download our portable TV app where you can catch everything from this show or any other one on this network. We've also got live sports and a whole lot more 24/7 in the palm of your hand, because it's TV as it should be. We'll be right back. Britain's Prince Andrew has renewed his attempts to throw out a lawsuit accusing him of sexual abuse and rape. Now, the court filing made Wednesday centers around the prince's case against Virginia Giuffre, who says the prince raped her 3 times when she was just 17 years old. You see her right there. The court document makes clear that the prince is not admitting sexual contact with Giuffre, but if something did happen, it was consensual. Now, additionally, the prince's legal team saying that if the case is not dismissed, they want a trial by jury. So representing many of the victims of Jeffrey Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell, and a number of others, were joined by attorney Gloria Allred. When you say, I didn't do the crime, but if it happened, it was consensual, that to me screams in bright lights guilty.
Well, not necessarily. And of course, the prince is defending against a civil lawsuit. This is not a criminal case, at least not at this point. I don't know if it ever would be. But the prince is simply defending. He is answering the complaint filed by Ms. Giuffre. And he has a number of defenses. You cited one of them, that, if they did have sex, essentially she consented. Of course, he appears to deny they even had sex. And then I expect him to argue at another point that as to what she alleges happened in New York, that age 17 is the age of consent in New York. He's also asking for a jury trial, and a lot of the press is making a very big deal about the fact that he's demanding a jury trial. Turns out it's actually not a big deal that he is, because she asked for a jury trial. And if only one of the two of them asks for a jury trial, there's going to be a jury trial. So since she asked for it in her complaint, he might as well say he's also demanding a jury trial. Because even if he said he wanted a judge to decide it, not a jury, it would still be a jury trial.
And Gloria, you've done so many of these high-profile cases, so you know better than anybody. Let's say this does go to trial. One of the big things you always hear is, will the client get a fair trial? What are going to be the hurdles? This is the Prince of Windsor. We've never seen this before. What are going to be those big hurdles, Gloria?
Well, for the victim, the accuser, who alleges she's a victim, Virginia, she's going to have to go through quite a bit. So, for example, he is suggesting that if she was damaged by any interaction that she alleges she had with him, that some of her damages may be attributable to others. So, in other words, she is alleged she was sex trafficked by Jeffrey Epstein to a number of people, one of which is Prince Andrew, Duke of York. He, of course, denies that she was trafficked to him, but he's saying that if she was trafficked to others, then perhaps some of her injuries are due to others to whom she was trafficked. And so he will bring out during the trial, through her testimony or through others, that in fact she was trafficked to others. In addition, he'll bring out that she allegedly recruited other girls to Jeffrey Epstein to be sex trafficked to Jeffrey Epstein. As a matter of fact, in the Ms. Maxwell criminal case, which you cited earlier, one of the victims, Caroline, in that case, testified that she was recruited to Epstein by Virginia. That's not going to go over well for Virginia, that she recruited others.
You always have to recruit others if you want to
It
get out.
doesn't mean that she wasn't a victim of Prince Andrew, if in fact she can prove that, and then of course he gets to defend against that.
Gloria, you defend a number of these victims, and kind of asking a personal question. You speak to a lot of these victims. We're inching closer and closer to what could be justice. How are these women seeing this? How do they feel? Do they feel vindication step by step? And how do you feel seeing that the powerful can possibly face their day in court?
Well, it is important that we all agree that no one is above the law, whether it's a prince or a pauper, or somebody in between, whether it's a celebrity or a typical person that is only known to their family, their co-workers, their community. No one is above the law, and that is really important. And so it is unusual for someone who is a prince to certainly be alleged to have engaged in the kind of conduct that Virginia alleges. On the other hand, he has to defend. And that's what's going to be so interesting. And, it is hard for someone who alleges she's a victim to go against someone who's powerful. But, victims do this every day. They go against powerful people, stepfathers who may have sexually abused them, or fathers, or uncles, or brothers, or their boss, or their former boyfriend, or husband, or stranger, or head of a business enterprise, sports figure, entertainment figure, religious figure who may have sexually abused them. So, women are becoming empowered, and they're throwing off their fear, and they're going to try to seek justice against those who they allege have victimized them.
Gloria, all right, we can't thank you enough again for coming on the program. Gloria, great to see you.
You too. Thank you. Bye-bye.
And that's our news, folks. We hope you learned something new. If you got friends looking for a newscast that's not like the rest of them, send them our way, or go ahead and download Portable TV. As always, folks, we want to wish you a good night. And as always, may the good news be yours.
Okay. Oh dear. Oh my god, I'm gonna kill you. I can't even. Oh, God. Fuck, this sucks so hard.
I can't let diabetes get in my way.
So here's what I do. Tonight, President Biden announcing he will nominate a historic candidate to the Supreme Court. The president coming before the cameras today with
Hello. Fuck you. Go play the video. I tell you to play, piece of shit. Okay.
In this video, you're going to learn about cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance is when we have a gap between what we believe is right and what we're doing. That creates dissonance in our lives. This means that we believe one thing, but we're acting on something else. Dissonance feels like having one foot on one boat and the other foot on another boat. As the two boats, as our actions and our beliefs drift further apart, the more uncomfortable we get. When we have unresolved gaps between our thoughts and our actions, we feel intensely uncomfortable. You can do all the coping and the meditation and the self-care that you can handle, but if you can't figure out cognitive dissonance, you're just not going to feel good. There is no substitute for integrity when it comes to peace of mind. So, for example, Jenny knows that she should exercise more. It's not that she's obese or anything, but her body feels slow and sluggish, and she gets out of breath when she's walking up a flight of stairs. She knows that she would feel better if she worked out. And each day that she doesn't exercise, she feels a tinge of disappointment and guilt. Now, dissonance makes us feel bad. Dissonance makes us feel unsettled or guilty or uncertain. Dissonance makes us feel fake or bad about ourselves. And this feeling isn't just in our minds, it creates measurable physical tension. And this isn't a bad thing, right? Discomfort can help us be motivated to change. This is strongest when it has to do with a belief about ourselves. So, for example, the thought, I value kindness, paired with the action, I just punched someone in the face, is going to bring on some pretty strong feelings of regret and guilt and disappointment. When we resolve dissonance, we can feel more peace, we can like ourselves more, and we can feel clarity. The opposite of dissonance is integrity. Integrity is not just about being honest with our words. Integrity means that we line up our actions with our values. And in my opinion, integrity is the path to positive self-worth, to more peaceful emotions, and a successful, purposeful life. Integrity is all about closing the gap between what we think and how we act. Resolving cognitive dissonance is essential to living a life of purpose, meaning, joy, and growth. So if you want to get better at feeling, and if you want to feel peaceful, then you need to learn what to do with those gaps in your life. Go ahead and write about one area in your life where your actions don't line up with your beliefs or your values. How does this affect you? How do you feel about yourself in regards to it? It's essential to acknowledge and resolve these conflicts as much as possible. When they're left to just simmer, it leaves us
I don't either.
feeling false and helpless and insecure. Dissonance leaves us feeling uncomfortable and false, and integrity can lead to us feeling secure and capable and whole. Now, there are 3 ways to resolve dissonance, but not all are equal. So the first one is to change our behavior to line up with our values. So whenever our values are positive and helpful, changing our behavior is usually the best way to close the gap. So let's explore what this would look like with Jenny, right? it sounds so simple, but if she were to start finding a way to exercise a little bit each day, her feeling of dissonance would be replaced by a feeling of pride. That seems basic enough, right? When we change our behaviors to line up with our values, the dissonance goes away. This works great when our values are positive and helpful, the kind of person we want to be. You don't have to be perfect to be moving in a good direction. What matters most is that you're putting an effort to live the way that you think you should be. Okay, the second way to close this gap is to change our thinking to line up with our behavior. So sometimes our emotions are built on faulty beliefs. We need to change how we think, right? In that case, we need to change our thinking to line up with our values and our behaviors instead of trying to change our actions to try and reach some impossible goal. So this is common with perfectionism or all or nothing thinking or with impossible expectations. So if you remember with the example, Jenny thinks she needs to exercise more, right? And she's not doing it. So in the previous way of solving that problem, she exercised more and then she felt better. Now, what if Jenny actually has an eating disorder and she's already exercising 3 to 4 hours a day, but she knows that this isn't enough? She thinks, oh, if I only worked out more, I would like myself. She beats herself up. She says, why am I so lazy, right? But in this case, her distorted thinking has led to these unrealistic standards for herself that aren't healthy. So what does she need to do to resolve her feelings of inadequacy? She thinks she needs to work out more, but she can't, so she feels bad, right? She needs to change her thinking to line up with reality. She needs to place more value on health and moderation and improve her sense of self-worth and let go of these perfectionistic ideas that are keeping her sick and making her miserable. So when she changes her thinking to line up with a healthier set of behaviors, like, exercising less than an hour every day, then she can feel more peace with her thoughts and actions. So that's the second way to close that gap, is we change how we think to line up with our values. Now, the third way to close this gap is the worst option for trying to resolve gaps, right? It is justifying our behavior. So justifying attempts to resolve this feeling of dissonance by numbing, blaming, avoiding, or just excusing the fact that we have a gap, right? So going back to the standing on two boats analogy, as the two boats separate, your legs begin to stretch apart and weaken, and it becomes painful and harder to stand. But instead of climbing aboard one boat to relieve the pain or pulling the two boats together, you just keep taking Tylenol, right? You just pop a bunch of painkillers. This is what justification does. Your problem isn't solved, but at least it doesn't hurt as much. Now, this is obviously a bad situation, but despite the harm that justifying causes, research shows that it's the most common way people do respond when they've done something wrong. Most of the time, people change what they believe to fit their behaviors instead of the other way around. So they say things like, oh, no one will know. Everyone does it. It's not that bad. She's worse than I am. I'm not a bad person. Or they'll justify it. Like, oh, I only stole this because I needed it more. This is all justification. It's all when you know in your heart that what you're doing is wrong and you make excuses so that you don't feel bad about it. Never ignore that guilty feeling. Don't just avoid it or try to make it go away. Take time for introspection. Take time to clarify what you really believe you should be doing. It's easy for us to just try and make ourselves feel good. But in the long run, that makes us feel miserable. So if you want to get good at processing emotions, you need to learn to notice the signs of rationalization and justification. So going back to Jenny, Jenny values health. She believes she should take care of her body. But she's not working out. So if she were justifying her behavior, she might start thinking, well, I just don't have time to exercise. Or she might get even meaner. Justification is nasty, right? She might say something like, well, at least I'm not as bad as my sister. Or she might say something like, it's not my fault that I'm overweight, it's my genes. And she would use these as an excuse to quiet the guilt that she feels about not living her values. Now, any of those statements could be true, right? It might be genetic that she is overweight, right? But she only needed that as an excuse when she was justifying. So clarifying what you really value and what's helpful for you is really quite different than justifying, which is trying not to feel bad.
Il faut se fier à notre instinct. Quoi qu'il nous dise,
Et quand on regarde en arrière, on réalise que tout cela en valait la peine.
Fuck off my TV, fuck.
Okay, guys, I have to interrupt because when I was making this video, I was just really focused on the idea of cognitive dissonance. And I maybe should have chosen an example that wasn't such a loaded topic. So I just want to clear things up. Your worth is not dependent on your size or your appearance. You can be healthy at many sizes. You don't have to lose weight or change anything about yourself to live with congruence. You don't have to look a certain way or weigh a certain number of pounds to be a good person, right? Your body is an instrument to do good in the world, not an ornament to be objectified. Now, that being said, the truth is that with anything you value, some real obstacles may come up, obstacles that you can't do anything about. So this could be genetics, or it could be racism or sexism, or whatever outside circumstances that you can't control. Honoring your values and resolving dissonance is really about being intentional instead of reactive. So it's like you lay out your values and your desires and your obstacles on the table, and then you choose what you're going to act on. So you may say, I'm going to choose to exercise even though I'm genetically predisposed to be bigger. I value exercise anyways. Or you may look at all these parts of your life and you may say, I value health, but for me, I value reading more, or I value spending more time with my friends. And the obstacles to exercising aren't worth it to me. So I'm going to choose to spend time with my family and friends instead of fighting my biology. Either way, whether you choose to exercise or you choose not to exercise, that cognitive dissonance can be resolved because you make a choice instead of just feeling like you should be doing something that you're not doing. Resolving cognitive dissonance is about being honest with yourself about the choices you make. So I just want to be really clear. Even though I use this example of someone who wants to become healthier, your worth is not dependent on your weight. You don't need to exercise to be a good person. It's really all about choosing what you value and where you're going to put your energy. So anyway, so I hope that clears things up, and let's get back to the video. Now, saying, oh, at least I'm not as fat as my sister, that sounds mean, right? But that's because justifying is mean. It's a dirty lie that we use to cover up our own emotions. And we secretly do it inside of our heads all the time. So Jenny really values being healthy, but when she doesn't act in line with that value, she feels bad. Each of these ways of justifying keep Jenny stuck in the same loop of believing she should exercise, not exercising, and trying not to notice it or feel bad about it. We all justify, but the less we do it, the better off we are. So let's talk about some of these signs of justification and rationalization. These include blaming others, comparing yourself to others to put them up or down, labeling yourself like, oh, I'm a good person. Even though I just stole that stuff from my employer, I'm a good worker. Or excusing yourself, oh, I just stole that stuff from my employer. I'm just a bad person. I can't help it. I'm just such a bad person. That's justification. Excuses. So we usually don't need reasons when we know we're doing the right thing. So for example, with Jenny, she potentially could have genes that make her more overweight, but it would still make sense that she values exercise to stay healthy. So the only reason she needed to remind herself that her genes were the way they were to keep her from feeling bad about something she knew she valued. She values exercise, right? I once heard a clinical psychologist whose responsibility was to determine whether inmates were responsible for their crimes or not, right? So basically he was evaluating them to see if they had the mental capacity to understand guilt and to understand right and wrong. And he said that the way he could always tell is if they excused their actions, if they had reasons and rationalizations for why they committed the crime that they did. If they used a reason, a rationalization, an excuse, or blame, that indicated that they did have a sense of guilt, that they understood enough that what they did was wrong, that they needed to cover it up. The inmates who were actually innocent due to, an inability to understand guilt, they didn't have any reasons or excuses for what they did. They just did it. Another sign of justification is denial. There's also extreme statements, right? Minimizing your problem, horribleizing others. And in this, if you catch yourself trying to convince others that you're right, that's another sign of justification. Holding different standards for yourself than others. All these things, all this justifying usually leads to suffering. This is the type of mental purgatory that often shows up as shoulds, right? well, I should be exercising more, but I just don't have the time. Or I should be kinder, but he is such a jerk. Shoulds are one way we create our own suffering. Keep an eye out for my upcoming video on how to work with those shouldy feelings. When it comes to cognitive dissonance, it's best to resolve it by really taking the time to clarify. Notice what your values are. We're going to spend time on that in an upcoming video. Notice what your thoughts and your behaviors are. Write about them. Don't allow yourself to make excuses, and choose whether you need to change your thoughts or change your behaviors to create more integrity in your life. I encourage you to take a time regularly to do an inventory with yourself, once a week or once a day or once a month, and take a look at your life and just check in and ask yourself, am I being the person I believe I should be? And if not, try to be 1% better each day. This is all about striving for integrity, working hard to have your actions line up with the kind of person that you want to be. Integrity is the source of self-respect, and in my opinion, it's essential for fighting depression and anxiety. But nobody's perfect, right? I mess up all the time. We all have these gaps. It's what we do with these gaps that matters. For me, this gap, the gap between what is right and what I do, as much as I try to bring my life in line and I work hard to improve myself each day, the only way for me to actively accept the reality that I have this gap is through the grace of God and trying hard every day to be humble, to be willing to change myself, and to be brutally honest with myself as much as possible.
Nope. There is no God, you're dumb.
Okay, time now to go through the papers. We're joined by larger-than-life Christopher Biggins, actor and, of course, a general good fellow. Thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you.
Economist Emily Carver as well. Very good morning.
Thank you for having me.
It's the first time you've done breakfast with us, and I know
It
it's
is.
hardly an hour. So we appreciate that.
It is ridiculous, hour. How do you do this every day?
It's a lot
It
of
looks so
makeup.
good.
Let's take a look, shall we, this morning at the front of the Mail. I mean, I should point out
That's
there's
fucking
actually a different story on the front of every paper.
Yeah.
It's quite an interesting day for news.
Okay.
Okay, time now to go through the papers. We're joined by larger-than-life Christopher Biggins, actor and, of course, a general good fellow. Thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you.
Economist Emily Carver as well. Very good morning.
Thank you for having me.
It's the first time you've done breakfast with us, and I know
It
it's
is.
hardly an hour. So we appreciate the
It is
effort.
ridiculous, hour. How do you do this every day?
No, it's a lot
It
of
looks so
makeup.
good.
Let's take a look, shall we, this morning at the front of the Mail. I mean, I should point out at this point, there's actually a different story on the front of every paper.
Yeah.
It's quite an interesting day for news.
I know, but this is very interesting because this is saying 600 Whitehall fat cats are paid over £150,000 a year. I think that Ava and I will probably join these fat cats if we could. It's a nice salary, isn't it?
Yeah, not bad.
Not bad at all. I mean, and the number of civil servants earning more than £150,000 a year has soared since the start of the pandemic, despite many of them working from home.
Nice work people get it.
Exactly. But also there are so many who the Prime Minister earns 150,000. Of course, he's probably the lowest paid Prime Minister or head of state in the world. But anyway, that's what he earns. A lot more, a huge amount more. Like, for instance, the pay list is topped by the boss of the controversial HS2 project, who earns £625,000. Public money. And also a lot of the rail project people are on 150,000, including Network Rail. Now, I love the railway. I'm going to Birmingham when I finish this later on today, and on the train. But the trains have gone up enormously. I thought of this, I now know where the money's going.
Quite.
Into these rich
Do
cats.
we think then that we have fat cats in this country? Do you think, we're talking about people like Sue Gray, who obviously is a very important role. Is this a fair salary in the sort of expensive world that we live in, or are they being overpaid?
I mean, it may well be, but we often see that there are council leaders, managers in the NHS,
managers in various areas of the public sector who, as you say, are earning far more than the Prime Minister. And I do wonder whether that is a good use of our public money. Also, with HS2 has become such a gravy train. There are so many vested interests. I doubt that it will have the economic benefits that they said it will. And £625,000, that's a huge salary for us to be forking out. And I don't suppose it's worth it.
Is there anything going to be done about this? And the reality is those salaries aren't going to change even.
Of course they're not. I mean, if they've agreed to that salary, I mean, however many years ago, they have to be paid. I mean, if they were got rid of, they'd have a huge amount of money to begin with.
The issue is whether a lot of them are on London waiting, and if they are now working from home, whether or not that should be taken away. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the argument is that if these very talented people, let's say if they're talented and what they do, if they were in the private sector, perhaps they would be able to get an even larger salary. So perhaps we have to compete in order to get the best people. But I'm not sure that we decide salaries in the best way. I'm not sure where these numbers come from and how we come to these assumptions that someone is worth £625,000.
Probably the person who's being paid £600,000. Not a bad figure.
I think you might be right.
Plans for today's dreams and all of tomorrow.
This content is made possible by individuals like you. Become a supporting member and access our growing library of membership courses and videos. Learn more about our membership at academyofideas.com/members. Authoritarianism in religion and science, let alone politics, is becoming increasingly accepted. Not particularly because so many people explicitly believe in it, but because they feel themselves individually powerless and anxious. So what else can one do except follow the mass political leader, or follow the authority of customs, public opinion, and social expectations? The American psychologist Rollo May wrote these words in 1953, and in the decades that followed, the West tiptoed into tyranny. A mass surveillance state was established. Free speech gave way to increasing levels of censorship. Statist bureaucracy and stifling regulations invaded ever more areas of life, and tax rates reached levels that in the past would have caused a revolution. However, in recent years, this tiptoe into tyranny has turned into a sprint, as some Western countries are flirting with full-blown totalitarian rule. But the existence of power-hungry and psychologically disturbed politicians who desire total control is not what makes our situation particularly precarious, for such individuals exist in all ages. Rather, our troubles lie with the fact that very few people possess the one virtue that can turn the tide back in the direction of freedom, that being the virtue of courage. And as Alexander Solzhenitsyn warned in 1978, a decline in courage may be the most striking feature which an outside observer notices in the West in our days. Should one point out that from ancient times, declining courage has been considered the beginning of the end? In this video, we are going to explore how a hyperconformity and blind obedience has infected the West and, in the process, crowded out the cultivation of courage. We will discuss how a widespread cowardice is permitting the rise of authoritarianism, and how a rebirth of courage is the antidote to our precarious political predicament. The pathological conformity that infects the West is generations in the making and the result of a confluence of factors. It is driven by a value system in which social validation occupies a preeminent position. It is furthered by the use of social media and the fact that success on these platforms is achieved by virtue signaling and conforming to the moral flavors of the day. It is also a product of an education system which deifies the democratic ideal and promotes the rights of the majority over the rights of the individual. These factors, combined with others, has created a society of hyperconformists. And as Rollo May explained, the opposite to courage, in our particular age, is automaton conformity. One of the ways that Western conformity manifests is through a blind obedience and a pathological need to follow rules. Most people believe that to be a good person is to be a compliant person, and to do what one is told by those in positions of political power and their lackeys in the media and celebrity culture. In acting with blind obedience, the conformist fails to differentiate between morality and legality, and so remains willfully ignorant of the fact that government rules can be immoral, driven by corruption, and that sometimes they pave the way for individual and social ruin. Or as Rollo May explains, our particular problem in the present day is an overwhelming tendency toward conformity. In such times, ethics tend more and more to be identified with obedience. One is good to the extent that one obeys the dictates of society. It is as though the more unquestioning obedience, the better. But what really is ethical about obedience? If one's goal were simple obedience, one could train a dog to fulfill the requirements very well. To see other people exercise independent judgment, self-responsibility, and self-reliance disturbs the conformist's belief in the value of obedience and so threatens their sense of self. It is not the case, therefore, that the conformist obeys while permitting others the freedom to make their own choice. Rather, as Stanley Feldman explains in a paper titled Enforcing Conformity, people who value social conformity support the government when it wants to increase its control over social behavior and punish nonconformity. Valuing social conformity increases the motivation for placing restrictions on behavior. The desire for social freedom is now subservient to the enforcement of social norms and rules. Thus, groups will be targeted for repression to the extent that they challenge social conformity. When a majority advocates for the government enforcement of conformity, a society places itself on what the psychologist Irvin Staub called a continuum of destruction. As the government uses coercion and force to punish a non-compliant minority, the majority rationalizes their support of such authoritarian measures by further demonizing the non-compliant, thus leading to increasingly severe government measures. One psychological consequence of harm doing is further devaluation of victims. People tend to assume that victims have earned their suffering by their actions or character. In several countries in the 20th century, such as the Soviet Union, Turkey, Germany, Cambodia, and China, government measures such as banning certain minority groups from restaurants, pubs, cafes, and other public spaces, imposing curfews, expelling them from their jobs, forcing them to pay fines, and restricting their freedom of movement and assembly, functioned as the first steps on a continuum of destruction that ended in mass scapegoating, mass imprisonment, and mass murder. In his book, The Psychology of Good and Evil, Irvin Staub elaborates on the psychological mechanism that facilitates a continuum of destruction. How does harmful behavior become the norm? Doing harm to a good person or passively witnessing it is inconsistent with a feeling of responsibility for the welfare of others and the belief in a just world. Inconsistency troubles us. We minimize it by reducing our concern for the welfare of those we harm or allow to suffer. We devalue them, justify their suffering by their evil nature or by higher ideals. A changed view of the victims, a changed attitude toward that suffering, and a changed self-concept result. To counter the continuum of destruction that is a product of too much conformity and too much government force, more people need to act with moral courage. Moral courage entails a willingness to encounter risks so as to defy immoral orders, reject authoritarian government control, and to stand up for the disappearing values of truth, freedom, and justice. And as Rushworth Kidder explains in his book, Moral Courage, where there's no danger, there's no courage. Anyone can endure security and well-being. The real challenges arise in the face of hazard. So it is with moral courage, where danger is endured for the sake of an overarching commitment to conscience, principles, or core values. Some acts of moral courage are accompanied by mild risks, such as being ridiculed, insulted, or ostracized. If, for example, we speak out against a status quo belief in the presence of a group of conformists, or if we refuse to adhere to social practices or mandates that are immoral or idiotic, we may lose friends or attract choice words from the obedient. But this is a small price to pay in exchange for doing what we believe is right. For as Rollo May explains, the hallmark of courage in our age of conformity is the capacity to stand on one's own convictions. However, sometimes acts of moral courage are accompanied by more grave risks, including but not limited to the loss of employment, physical or financial penalties, imprisonment, or in some cases, even death. Of all the agonizing ethical dilemmas facing humanity, writes Rushworth Kidder, few are more wrenching than the choice between what's right for the world and what's right for you and your family. Carl Jung called the men and women willing to confront great dangers in defiance of tyranny the true leaders of mankind. And to learn about the mindset of one of these leaders, we can turn to the story of Viktor Pestov. In 1967, Pestov was a 20-year-old living in the Soviet Union. His family was well off by Soviet standards, and his mother was a high-ranking member of the KGB. Yet Pestov could not avert his eyes from the boot of tyranny that was crushing society, and so he took a keen interest in political matters. And when Soviet tanks rode into Czechoslovakia and violently stamped out the human rights protest known as the Prague Spring, Pestov told his friend, "We must do something about this." Pestov and his brother set up a clandestine group called Free Russia, and he warned those who joined that they would likely be arrested within the year. Yet all agreed that the battle for freedom justified the risk, and so they began publishing pamphlets exposing the lies of the Soviet regime and snuck out in the dead of night to distribute them. The KGB quickly identified the group as a threat, and in 1970, Pestov was arrested. His mother was fired from the KGB and never allowed to work in Russia again, and Pestov was sentenced to 5 years in a Soviet prison camp. Pestov decided to stand up to the Soviet regime and therein place himself and inadvertently his mother in great danger, because he could not in good conscience sit idly by as a corrupt regime of thousands destroyed the lives of millions. He understood that if he did not stand up for the freedom of others, he could not expect others to stand up for his, and that if nobody did anything, everyone was doomed. And so he chose to face danger, to fight for freedom, and to place a portion of the fate of society on his back. He saw himself as fighting against the malevolent idea that someone will think for you, someone will make decisions for you, and as he explained, a person should be the master of his own fate. In a conversation with Rushworth Kidder, Pestov reflected on the grave dangers he voluntarily faced and on the 5 years he spent in prison. "I believe I did the right thing," Pestov concluded. "I wasn't silent. I was saying and doing what I had to do. There was a very small contribution of mine to the fact that the communists were pushed out of power. Unless more people can muster up the moral courage to renounce conformity in favor of standing up for freedom and for what is right, and at the very least make a small contribution to combating tyranny, Western societies will continue moving towards what Ayn Rand called the stage of the ultimate inversion, or as she warns, we are fast approaching the stage of the ultimate inversion, the stage where the government is free to do anything it pleases, while the citizens may act only by permission, which is the stage of the darkest periods of human history, the stage of rule by brute force. Become a supporting member and access our growing library of membership courses and videos. Learn more about our membership at academyofIdeas.com/members.
By the end of this video, you're going to know how to use mindfulness in your life. You're going to experience mindfulness.
On this video,
If you want to see how much media messaging affects perception, you need only glance at a viral clip of them Canadian kids last week and how they regarded unvaccinated people. And again, to reiterate once more, I don't have an opinion on what anyone should do about healthcare decisions. That's not my area of expertise. I'm interested only in the way that the media relays information and the likely outcome of we can build this. The way that information is relayed. A piece of footage went viral last week on social media. The Nouveau talk show, the Samantha Quattro Julie, hosted by Julia Snyder, a Quebec talk show, aired a segment that interviewed children and asked them what they thought of unvaccinated people. Let's have a look over on Studio. You've probably seen it, right?
Au vaccin, vous autres? Oui, tous les deux, on a une seule dose.
Why are we talking to children on a talk show? What's the segment?
Ah oui? Est-ce que vous êtes d'accord, vous autres, avec la vaccination obligatoire? Oui. Oui? Bon. Ah oui, hein?
Wow.
On dirait que j'essaie de rigoler, Julie.
Oh my god, yeah.
It does look like you
Fucking microphone's fucking working again.
Qu'est-ce qu'on devrait faire avec les gens qui ne veulent pas se faire vacciner? On devrait appeler la police.
Oui. Yeah, I mean, it's weird, isn't it, when there's a conflation of medical and legal matters. This is something that I've had an opinion on for a while because, of course, I'm